Hey guys, it's Barrett with the Gimpy Camper. So I wanted to just take 1 second to tell you that this video ended up being really long. It was like 35 or 40 minutes long. So I'm just gonna split it up into 3 different videos. This is gonna be part 1 on how to build the generator shed. So we're gonna get right into it. And just so you know what's coming up in this video, it's gonna be the general basic structure of the shed, how to add the vents in the side of the shed, as well as insulating the shed in order to keep everything running great. So that's what we're gonna have this week. Stick around for the future videos for the rest of the shed build, and they'll all be linked here as well as in the description. So the first step in making this thing is actually having a foundation to put it on. The best case scenario is gonna be a concrete pad. But if you don't have one, don't wanna fool with that, don't wanna go through the expense of it, I also suggest using patio pavers. That's what I did here. It worked out really well. So I got some gravel and I put it along the ground here, and then I made it as level as possible, tamped it down, and I put some 16-inch square patio pavers on here. I actually ended up doing 10 pavers for the generator shed. So there are 2 rows of 5, and being side by side, those 32 inches from the pavers was just wide enough for this generator shed. Couldn't be any more pleased with the way that that worked. And then I have some overhang out here that I keep the propane tanks on. The next thing that we had to do when we built the generator sheds, we actually had to put the structure of the shed together because it comes in a box and it is not pre-assembled. This is a Craftsman shed that I got from Lowe's. I'm going to put a link to that in the description. That particular link is not an affiliate link because I feel better about recommending this product than the ones that I saw on Amazon, strictly because I know the construction type on here. I know that there's places that you can screw to, and I've hacked into it and it still maintained a lot of its rigidity. So that's what I was worried about with ordering one online and have never put hands on it before. So I did find a video on YouTube about how to put this shed together, and I just watched it and did it step by step and only had to look at the directions like twice, and it made pretty quick work of this. So the hardest part to putting this particular shed together is putting these door hinges on and getting the doors hung. But besides that, it was easy peasy. Now the next thing in my process was putting in the ventilation holes, cutting the holes out for these ventilation ducts. And I decided to use 2 20-inch air returns. And these are just the surface mount ones that screw onto the sides. These are actually just coated deck screws that I used. I found out after I did these, when I started doing some other steps, these seem to hold okay, but I really prefer the number 12 screws. I got some number 12 panhead screws, and they seem to work a lot better. It's just, I feel more confident in their ability to hold things on over time. We'll see how these go. So the way that I decided to put these on is I just held the grates up here and I just traced around them with a marker. And when I did that, I took a measurement here. I think it was about 1 inch. And so I just made another box inside the trace line that I made that was 1 inch smaller. That way it had plenty of stuff that I could screw onto. Now before I actually put the air returns in, oh, pro tip, don't do what I did. So we'll get there in a minute. But before you actually put this stuff in, you need to get fire block foam and you need to spray in all these cavities that's open after you cut this out. I had started by cutting down some 1x material and putting it in there, but that was going to be way too much of an issue, and I figured out that I didn't really need it. But you do need air foam, because if you don't, the sound out of this thing, it's just going to resonate in those open voids. So you need to put the fire block foam in there, and then you can trim it off, and it'll be a lot nicer finish than what I came up with when I did it after I installed these. Now, in order to cut those holes out for those vents and stuff, I just use a circular saw, my cordless DeWalt saw. I just use that to cut those panels out. But then I had to go back. You got to use an oscillating saw or a hand saw or a jigsaw or saber saw or something just to cut those corners out, because that circular saw is not quite going to get all the way to the corner. One more thing, guys, that I just wanted to add about the air vents is that I did put some screen inside them. I actually used a stapler and just stapled the screen to the paneling after I cut the panel out of the center. And that way the screen was going to be stuck there. and then I just put the air return over top of the screen. Now keep the insects from getting in there. Now when you get to that point, then you hold this thing up there and you put the screws in. Then I went back afterwards, we'll get there in a minute, and I put some silicone all around the edges on everything, but I think that that's going to help hold it in place a little bit better. My concern with the 20-inch air opening is that you are taking quite a bit of the structure out of this on both sides. And some people use a lot of smaller air returns, but I wanted as much ventilation as I could. I also decided that I just wanted 2 holes for ventilation. So I have a 20-inch air return here, and that return on the other side was for the intake of the air. And then I have a 20-inch air return that I put on the other side, and this is the exhaust for the ventilation. Now, I did that, and I chose to do that for one reason. And that's because I feel like if I put smaller vents all around, it's actually going to cause less air to drag across the generator. I feel like by doing this, and I did put the exhaust one higher above because heat rises. And so basically what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to sweep air from the bottom of the other corner up to this and just keep air moving over that generator constantly. I feel like if I would have put some small air returns in the front and the back, everything else, that it wouldn't drag it across the generator, which was my whole goal in this. So that's all I did for the air return. My plan for the ventilation is to use a regular size contractor type fan because it had a lot higher CFMs than the attic fans that I saw people using, and it's 20 inches versus 8 inches with the shutters and stuff. I feel like this is going to be a great option. I want to actually get into how I installed that afterwards, because as you can see, all this insulation is in place underneath that, so we have to take care of that first. Another thing that you want to do before you do the insulation is to cut out the approximate area that you're going to have your exhaust going through. And so this generator, the exhaust goes out of the back side of the generator. And so basically I just figured out about where that would go if I was to take a pipe and run it straight out. And I made an area there. And like I said in the other video, if you don't have something insulating that, then this plastic shed can melt because this exhaust is pretty hot. And so my take on that is what a lot of people do is to put some concrete board in that area. So I got some 1/4 inch backer board that's Durock. I just cut out a 10 by 12 inch area in the back of the shed so I'd have plenty of room and plenty of insulation before I got to the plastic. And then when it comes to the other time, I cut out a 14 by 12 piece of Durock and put there. And then I waited to put the hole in or anything till I had the exhaust done. So just go ahead and cut that hole out too in the approximate location where the exhaust pipe would be in the center of it. Okay, so let's go over how we did the insulation. So I used a double insulation approach. Some people just use concrete board to line the inside with, but the problem that I find with that, and I was originally thinking about it, but it's just a lot of weight for this plastic structure that you've already cut some of the guts out of. So I did not go that route. And then some people use foam board and they have temperature rated foam board. I couldn't find any temperature ratings on the foam board that I went with. So what I did is I used 1/2 inch foam board, and it did have a foil layer on the outside, but then I used Reflectix over the top of that. So what I did is I cut the foam board to approximate size, and then I cut the Reflectix to the same approximate size, wrapped all the edges with the foil tape, and then I screwed it to the side of the shed. Now, whenever I screwed it to the shed, I used number 12 screws here. I had 3/4 inch at first, and they weren't long enough. When you think that the Reflectix plus the 1/2 inch of foam, that doesn't leave you a lot. So I used 1.25 inch. I didn't have any screws poke out. And then I felt my hand right here because I noticed this screw. So there is one that sticks out right there where that lock clasp goes, but that's the only one that I found, and I just found it by accident. So with that, you got to use a washer because the screw's just going to kind of suck up in the insulation. So I used fender washers. These were 1/4 inch by 1.25 inch, and so that 1/4 inch worked really nice just for the number 12 screw to hold, and then the 1.25 just gives it surface area so that it's holding a bigger area to the side of the shed. And like I say, I did go over all the edges with foil tape. In the back corners, I kind of overlapped the reflectix. I just left it longer when I put the sides in. And when I did that, I just used foil tape down the midsection here. I figured if I were to overlap it, it might help a little bit more. And so that's what I did. I do want to say the hardest part to putting the insulation in was definitely putting this on the ceiling. I used the same screws and everything. I did not have any go through there, but the problem was that there's more recessed areas in the ceiling. There are plenty of ribs that go all the way across, but even when I marked it on both sides and used a straight edge, for some reason I kept missing it. So just do the best you can. Which brings me to one thing that I want to say. When you spend $300 on something new, it makes you feel a little iffy just cutting holes in it and stuff. You know what I mean? Now, to insulate the floor to help with vibrations and help protect against heat, I did use a rubber mat. I used a 1/2 inch thick rubber mat from Tractor Supply. It was about 30 bucks. It was really hard to cut. That was the hardest part, to putting that in there. The best way, I thought, well, I was having a hard time cutting it with a knife and I couldn't figure out if it was actually cutting or not. And so I actually did try a circular saw. It did not do anything to this thing. All it did was smoke. So when I watched some videos on YouTube, best thing that I found was using a utility knife or carpet knife. And so after I saw that it worked and I went over it about 10 or 12 times with a utility knife and a straight edge, it did cut pretty easily after I figured out the hang of it. Now, it was at this point that I decided to do the spray foam. And you can tell I had to leave it kind of a little bit long because it just wasn't working. I was cutting in the insulation some. I wasn't getting a good clean cut. And I didn't want to cut the screen that I already put in there. So do like I said and put the spray foam in before you put the screens and the air returns in and the insulation in. Just make it easy for you.